Welcome back. You are listening to United Way's Community Talk. I'm Jena Gullo, the Executive Director of the Missourie Slope Area-Wide United Way, and hosting with me today is Amanda Schweiters, our Marketing Manager.
Hello, welcome back, everyone. This is an exciting segment today because we get to talk a little bit more about United Way's emergency homeless shelter.
Yeah, it's been quite a ride. It's quite a crisis last winter, and we're doing what we can.
Mm-hmm. And so, Jena, you're the host, but you're also my guest this segment. So welcome.
Thank you for having me, Amanda.
Thank you for joining me. I thought it would be great if we could just, last year when I started at United Way right when everything kind of started to, I guess, evolve or progress. And so I started at United Way last October, and you at that time were meeting with some of the Homeless Coalition meetings prior to that, assessing a situation where we knew that the only men's emergency homeless shelter was going to be closing in October. And so they were trying to develop a long-term plan. And so I think it'd be really important for you just to explain a little bit about why United Way stepped up in October and then why we continued throughout the winter, and give some of the background and history of that.
So we actually learned that Ruth Meyers was going to be closing their men's emergency homeless shelter back in May of 2017 is when we first learned about it. At that time, the Homeless Coalition raised their hand and they said, we'll come up with a plan so that people are not out in the cold during the winter time. And so we're part of the coalition, or we were when it was still around. And so we attended the meetings, and there really, at the end of the day, were a lot of barriers locally to someone stepping up and saying, we'll do this. And so I remember a meeting in early October because the due date or the deadline was that Ruth Meyers was going to be closing on November 1st, right at the start of winter. And I remember at the beginning of October being at a meeting and they were about ready to adjourn. And I said, you guys, I raised my hand. I said, we don't have a plan A. We don't have a plan B to the plan A. I said, we need something more concrete here. And they all kind of looked around and said, no, let's just wait and see what happens with the old building, if we can use that temporarily or not. Well, okay, so that just didn't settle right with United Way. And so I went to my board at that point, and we had been talking about the needs for the homeless and for those living in poverty. We've been talking about the lack of consistent and quality services in Bismarck, Mandan for years. For years, this has been an issue and a gap. And so it wasn't too surprising when at the end of October, there still wasn't a plan. There still wasn't an agency raising their hand and saying, we'll do it, even temporarily. And so Melanie Heidkamp, the director at YouthWorks, actually approached me and said, will United Way take this on? And it was the midst of our campaign season. It's the busiest time, and we only had 4 employees then. That's what we have now. So we do a lot of work in the community, and I didn't physically think we'd be able to take this on, physically or financially. But I said, okay, we will give the Homeless Coalition 1 more month. We'll take it on for the month of November. And I immediately started making calls and sending out emails. And I mean, we asked the city for help. We asked Burleigh County Emergency Management. I asked for a room at the Civic Center. We asked everybody and anybody. And really, the ones that really stood up was the North Dakota Department of Health. Mylynn Tufte and her team said, Jena, if you can secure a location, we will set up cots, blankets, hygiene supplies, you name it, within 2 hours, day or night. And I remember that Friday night being on the phone with 1,000,001 people, and we weren't able to secure a location. So that's when, at that point, we initially started to put people in hotel rooms. Now, I know that's absolutely crazy, but for a short-term emergency plan, that's what we needed to do. And that allowed us time to then, I know Mark Heiner and I went and looked at the old Teen Challenge building in Mandan. We decided, no, we are not going to put this in a residential neighborhood. I just didn't feel comfortable with that. because we have so many partners, and who funds us, and we want to do what's right and best for the whole community. So I went to a church, and the church said yes, and we just need to have a parish council meeting. The parish council unanimously voted yes. It was really exciting. And they needed approval from the bishop, the Catholic bishop. And the bishop said no. And unfortunately, he didn't give us any reasons. He just said no. So that was rather disappointing, because I don't know that people realized the crisis that we were in. People were sleeping in cars. We had people breaking into storage units or apartment buildings, just doing anything for warmth.
Survival, yeah.
Yeah, and we started meeting with people every single night since October 27th of 2017. We had people coming to us. Oh my gosh, I remember this one gentleman been sleeping outside. His fingertips were black from frostbite.
Wow.
It was heart-wrenching. And these are people you might not see on a normal day. You might not even realize that they exist and that they're from the area and they're in need of help.
I think a kind of an eye-opening experience for me from that experience too was some of the people that you saw at intake they were out working and they were active in their community, and you had no idea they were homeless, and they did not want their friends or family to know. I remember I had a camera with to take some pictures, and they were like terrified by the idea, like, please do not take my photo. Like, my friends and family do not know that I'm going through this, and I don't want them to know. So it was very much like an independency, and people they have like a pride that they don't want other people to know that they're going through these experiences. And so, I vividly remember that very clearly. So another question too is, what are some of the reasons someone experiences homelessness? We've been doing this now for over a year, and I think there's a pretty broad spectrum of reasons why people go through homelessness and experience this crisis. And so why don't you explain some of the common ones? So
it has been an eye-opening experience. I used to work with the homeless mentally ill back in New York, and ran a supported housing program and single room occupancy program. And so it's not my first experience, right? And then I did mission work for years, working with, third world poor. But what was interesting to me is, when we were first meeting with people in November, people were coming from all walks of life. We had single men, we had families, we had people with these little kids that we needed to get back into school. And there were medical issues. We had one guy come to us who had been in his apartment for 14 years. Again, from the Bismarck area, had a steady job and had gout. And he was in and out of the hospitals, couldn't walk, and his job was at a grocery store, storing, putting, product on shelves. And, he was in and out of the hospital. He got behind 4 months on rent, and he was evicted. And this is someone who is just yearning to regain his health and get a job again. And so now he was able to get a job and has been really trying hard to work through it. So at the end of November, the Homeless Coalition came to United Way and asked if we would continue to provide services throughout the whole winter. And then at that point, at the end of winter, even though there was a committee that was working really hard, they were coming up short because, again, they were speaking to people out of state. They were, trying to secure revenue. And at that point, there wasn't enough progress made. And United Way needed to then start applying for grants and find sustainable funding. And so we opened up a shelter March 1st. And it's been amazing. It's for men, women, and children. We have a lot of women that come to us from a domestic violence situation. And this one woman, her face completely black and blue. I remember it so vividly. And I remember we were able to get her into another program in town. Well, she tested positive for meth. And I said, Roberta, I just could have strangled the lady. I really could, because she wanted our help. I said, Roberta, you got to stop using meth. for us to help you. And then I realized at the end of the night that really wasn't the right approach. It's certainly, God wouldn't turn his back on us. And so we ended up saying, if you will get help, we'll help you, which we would have probably helped her regardless, because we have helped a number of people facing addiction, even if they're not interested in getting help. But the nice thing is she did want help. We were able to put her in a hotel for a couple nights, get her into treatment, which she successfully completed. She then got into our shelter, started her GED courses, got 2 jobs. She has been living on her own for the last, I would say, 6 to 8 months. I don't even know how long it's been. And she's going to start volunteering at our shelter to give back.
Oh, that's amazing.
We see that time and time again. Since July of this last year through October, there were over 80 people that we've helped from our shelter get into permanent housing.
That's awesome. Wow. What an amazing impact it's made on their lives. And there's so many more individuals that we will be helping. But stay tuned. I guess we will be right back. Tune into SuperTalk 1270 and we'll hear some more about our emergency homeless shelter and hear some more from Jena Gullo.
Currently, it's 22.
The Red River Farm Network. Ag News is here on SuperTalk 1270.
Welcome back. You are listening to United Way's Community Talk. I'm the Executive Director, Jena Gullo, and co-hosting with me today is Amanda Schweiters, our Marketing Manager.
Hello, welcome back, everyone. I hope you're enjoying today's show. Like Jen had mentioned previously, you can find us every other week, generously thanks to SuperTalk 1270 and Town Square Media for donating this hour from 11 to noon. And so we are just going to continue back into, we were having the conversation about an update and kind of the history of how United Way's emergency homeless shelter opened. And thank you so much for being able to provide the information for everyone, Jena. We were just visiting a little bit about how we officially opened the shelter on March. And so why don't you just kind of tell everyone that's listening about the shelter place, like how many rooms do we lease? We have men, women, and children. I think a lot of people are unaware of everything that we provide there.
Sure. So United Way embarking on this new adventure for our community. The only reason we stepped up to do it is literally because no one else would. And we knew the importance of having an emergency shelter in a community of this size. So we also needed to mitigate our risk. We weren't sure how many homeless people we would or wouldn't need to be serving. We haven't had quality data for a number of years in our area on homelessness and on basic needs services. So we knew that was a big gap. And we didn't want to overspend or overinvest in emergency services when we know that although you need a shelter in the community, it's not necessarily the best investment in order to get people into permanent housing. So we knew we wanted to focus heavily on how are we going to transition people out of the shelter, not just provide a roof over their head. So what we did is we decided on 40 physical beds. Now, mind you, the shelter that had closed was a men's emergency shelter, but we have not had a shelter for women and children in many, many years in Bismarck, Mandan, since Ruth Meyers had closed that emergency shelter. And so we have 40 physical beds. We're able to provide shelter to men, women, and children. And so if we have an individual who's under the age of 18, a young adult or a teen, we refer them directly to YouthWorks. But they're only able to do emergency shelter for people under the age of 18. Otherwise, it's typically a 3-month waiting period if you're over the age of 18 to get into their transitional housing. It's very similar to Welcome House and Ruth Meyers in our community. Welcome House has 4 rooms, so they're able to help 4 families at a time, but you can't get in there immediately. And the same at Ruth Meyers. Now, Ruth Meyers, you go through an intake process, but you also need to be able to pay $60 per adult per week. So we might have someone come into the shelter and refer them over to Ruth Meyers, but if they don't have a job and can't pay, they can't stay. And so they might kick people out back to our shelter. So we lease out 14 individual rooms. We actually have space to help up to 68 people if we use every square inch of floor. And sometimes we do have to put people on the floor. There have only been a handful of times that we have had to turn people away. And lately, we were up to 65 in July, which was astronomical to me that we were that high when it was so warm out. And then we went down to right around 50, 55. But last night, we were at 43. So it's interesting how it really goes up and down, and it's not a stable population. Most people are in and out of our shelter within 3 weeks, and that includes the long stayers who have been there since October 27th, and we've had a handful of those as well.
Well, that's pretty awesome that people can transition out and within 3 weeks. So you had mentioned that's like we had around 65 in July, and I think a lot of times we think that the shelter is really vital and important during the winter months. But now operating it for almost an entire year, do you think the need is just as important in the summer and spring as it is in the winter? Or do you feel like there's a trend to when people need emergency help the most? So
this is the thing. During the winter time, it truly is like a life or death situation. We all know temperatures plummet in North Dakota. And so we have had people come to us that were sleeping in their cars, sleeping in snowbanks. And it's a really, really dire situation. However, it's just as important if you have a mentally ill person who's having difficulty caring for themselves or managing their symptoms, and they're on the streets, they're going to be more likely to be the victim of assaults or attacks rather than the perpetrator. And we've known that's a statistic, forever that we've said. And that is true. And so the shelter, yes, it's a warm and safe place to be. That's number one. It is a roof over their head. Number two, we serve a meal. It's because of our volunteers who pay for, prepare, and come in and serve a meal. But most importantly, it's about relationships, making people feel valued and dignified. And it's at that point when you develop that trust that they're more receptive to being linked to services. And so then we link them, whether it be mental health or addiction services, or maybe it's job services. People usually need a week or so of just stability to get their mind back to, functioning again. And in the midst of crisis, no one wants to be in a shelter. Absolutely no one wants that to be their home. I was talking to a gentleman who's been with us for a long time, and I said, gosh, what do you think needs to happen? How can we help to get you your own apartment? And because he's able to work, but he's not able to hold down a job because of his mental illness, but he's able to work in these short spurts. And he said, Jena, I don't know. I guess I just assumed, I just realized that maybe this is just my lot in life. I said, no, it doesn't have to be your lot in life. And, when you look at homeless people, whether they're chronic or not, the one consistent thing I see is that they've experienced trauma in their life, typically in their childhood. And they don't even see that path to get back to stability. They don't know what stability necessarily means or looks like. And they don't see how. And I see this with my foster kids a lot too. If you don't even see the path, how the heck are you going to get on it and move forward in your life? And so we've really approached it with trying to develop positive, healthy, welcoming relationships with people and letting them know that they're not alone, that we care, and that we can help them.
And you guys are doing a great job. Jera is our licensed social worker over there, and she does such an amazing job of really connecting these guys to the resources that they need. And everybody is individual case-by-case situation, and so you kind of have to handle those individuals, each case one at a time. One of the things since we've opened is United Way has has been operating as an overnight shelter only. However, we do recognize, especially with these brutal winters that we experience, that at 24 hours is, for a community our size, is very important. And so, Jena, how can our community help us get to funding a 24-hour emergency homeless shelter?
Yeah, well, the way the United Way board looks at it is that we can't do it all. We have to prioritize, and we have to be able to pay for the services that we're providing, or else we're going to end up in the red every year and bring down the United Way, which I'm not willing to do. And so first and foremost, we've committed to providing overnight emergency shelter for homeless men, women, and children in our community. We need to raise the funds to be able to do that. And then if we get to a point where we're sustainable, we are able to look at expanding our services. A drop-in center or a 24-hour, 7 days a week shelter is a need that Bismarck Mandan has been talking about for years. The Homeless Coalition, the city of Bismarck, because, where do people go right now? They go to the library. That's not appropriate. That's not what our library is there for. And our librarians have been very gracious at trying to do what they can to make, to keep people safe. But that's a big need in our community. For United Way to be able to fill that gap as well, we would first need to raise the extra $150,000 for our shelter, and then we would need an additional $100,000 to be staffed 24/7. We're not able to do it with volunteers alone. Insurance purposes, liability purposes, we can't allow that. Volunteers can certainly help, and people can contact our office if you want to be involved. We are operating on a shoestring budget this year. And mainly because we need to make sure we have the money to keep this going. And so we recognize that the value of volunteers, and, we will train you in. You can't just pop into the shelter. We need to do background checks and train you in. Or if you just want an experience and you want to serve a meal, you can get on our schedule for that. Or maybe your church wants to get involved, have an offering to keep our shelter open. Give some products like toilet paper and cleaning supplies. Those are the types of things that really help, and that help to reduce our expenses.
Awesome. Well, Jena, we're coming up to the end. Is there anything else you want to add before we conclude?
Just that a community of our size really does need an emergency shelter. It's an opportunity for people to be safe and warm, and then get linked to services. We have over 100 people that we've put into permanent housing that have maintained their permanent housing. We're really proud of that, but we need the community's help. So go online today at msaunitedway.org. Thanks for tuning in.